Okay, let's get going. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. This webinar is how Plaid Forecast supports strategic enrollment management and planning. Thank you very much for joining us. So the scenario that we're going to look at today is about how it can be sometimes difficult to share enrollment forecast scenarios with others, in part because when we share spreadsheets by email, sometimes people fall behind. We've all been there and we go on vacation or our inbox gets flooded. And sometimes we find an email that we meant to get to a little while ago. When this person falls behind by 3 weeks on their email and they review a scenario that's now out of date, your analysts spend their lives reconciling the old and new. This is not optimal for a variety of reasons. So today we're going to talk about how Plaid Forecast has scenario sharing built right in, so that even if somebody falls behind on their email, when they go to view the results, they're seeing the latest available. So it's been a pretty interesting winter and spring term if you work in enrollment planning. If you're based in Canada like I am, you probably saw the federal government announcements on international student admissions changes. There are cuts. There were lots of doom and gloom articles. There's a few that suggest certain provinces could benefit. And things have changed considerably since the announcements first came out as well. Different provinces and territories are now ramping up their ability to do attestation letters so that students can begin getting admitted again. It'll be interesting to see what happens in fall 2024 for Canadian institutions, whether students choose to go elsewhere while they wait, or whether they actually come through and some of the panic is averted. We see similar in the United States. There's a lot of talk about an enrollment or demographic cliff and some doom and gloom articles about that. But in a bit of positive light, we're seeing that college enrollments are starting to rebound this year. So we hope that that trend continues and that colleges find new and interesting ways to serve different kinds of learners, whether it's dual enrollment, mature students, non-traditional learners, underserved demographics, et cetera. We think there's opportunities here, but we'll have to be a lot more strategic to find them in the future. And if you're interested, on the Plaid website are a couple of blog posts related to the international study permit changes in Canada. Feel free to have a look, and we'd very much welcome your feedback. There'll be more projections coming now that the provinces are starting to release their internal targets, as opposed to us just taking wild guesses at what they might do. So enrollment planning becomes really important when there's changes to the plan. So in this example, the blue line is the original growth plan for our fictitious university, Plaid University. You'll see a little bit more about this today. We can see on the blue line that over the span of 5 years, we were expecting in the range of 184 million in tuition when we get to the end of that 5 years. But the new plan, now there's been some cuts to our original growth targets, means that we're actually going to drop to 162 million. So in that year, it's a 20-odd million dollar cut, but over 5 years, it's about 44 million. These get to be big numbers in a hurry and no longer represent where we can just trim around the edges and reduce our expenses. This kind of difference probably means early retirements, layoffs, and other challenges associated with budget cuts. So in terms of this international student study permit cut in Canada, we're estimating that that could be a budget cut of about $4 million potentially to higher education institutions, and about half of that would be in Ontario. So where does enrollment forecasting come into this? I used to work for a large research university and was responsible for the enrollment forecast. And what I really wanted was to make it possible for my AVP to be able to create scenarios, get results, and share them while using her phone on the bus on the way to campus. I'm proud to say that in 2024, we built such a tool, and we're going to show you some of that today. So who is Plaid? Why am I here? Plaid empowers strategic enrollment management professionals to actively plan and better serve their diverse learners while meeting institutional goals. We provide a variety of services around data integration, data analytics, forecasting, which we'll talk a lot about today, and data governance. We've worked with a variety of institutions across North America. Some of our select clients are shown here. We're ever grateful for your partnership. And if you're new to interacting with Plaid, we'd love to talk to you about your institution and whether there's anything we can do to help or help you in your journey. So when we talk about enrollment, it means different things to different people. So I wanted to just clarify what we're talking about here today. So for an enrollment forecast, what we're talking about is headcount and FTE that you see on the right there in purple. FTE is full-time equivalent. And at many institutions, it represents roughly taking 30 credit hours or 10 courses per year. This fluctuates a little bit depending on the program and the kind of institution, but that's the rough idea. Our goal for this kind of enrollment forecast is to support planning. So we're talking about aggregate numbers of students, as in there's 1,000 students in your Bachelor of Arts program, 500 of those are domestic at the first year level, for example. What we're not talking about is individual student enrollments for the purposes of something like an early alert or an intervention system. That's a bit of a different purpose. So we're talking about supporting planning here. How many students will there be where within my system in the future? So today we're going to walk through the concept of sharing, and I'm going to try and take on a couple of different personalities here live in the webinar. So I'm going to start as a representative of Central, where I've worked in, say, institutional research in the past, and then I'm going to flip hats and become the Dean of Business, and I'm going to make some changes to that. I'm going to talk about what those might mean. So that's the rough idea of our demo, but as part of this, we're going to show how we create a scenario, how we run a scenario, how we share it with others, and potentially how we unshare it with others if it's relevant. So let's get into the fun stuff. Okay, so on the screen now is what my view looks like if I'm a central planner of some kind. Let's say I work as a senior planning and research analyst in institutional research. I'm responsible for the enrollment forecast. You can see here on the scenario screen that there's a number of different scenarios that I've created. This is a test environment, so you do see some testing that's happening as well. But importantly to our end users, they don't see this part unless we choose to share it with them. So just for context, I'm now going to flip hats temporarily and say that I'm the Dean of Business. I'll put another browser onto the screen for you. So here we can see that the Dean has a timeline where I've been testing my sharing and making sure it's working before the webinar, but they can see no scenarios. So when I click on scenarios, what you should see is no scenarios yet. They could create a scenario if they wanted to, but nobody shared anything with them. So the first one is we're going to create a scenario to make this Dean's life easier. So I'm going to go back to my central hat here. So this is me in Central as an analyst again. I have created the Central Plan A. And when I drill into this scenario, I can see that it has not been run yet. So there's no results to be found. But what a scenario primarily consists of is a series of intakes. And so I'll pick a couple of the large undergraduate programs just to give you a flavor of what intakes might look like here. So actually, let's just start with Bachelor of Arts and Domestic, and we'll roll out our intakes for 2 years, let's say. This is a 5-year scenario, but I've repeated the pattern over that time period. So you see the same numbers repeating themselves over and over again. So we can see that in the Bachelor of Arts, our winter intake has about 50 students. Our summer intake has 500, and our fall intake has 70. So this maybe is a peculiar arts program in terms of its admission pattern, or it's very possible that I type out those and put the wrong one in the summer term. In any case, this is the pattern that we're looking at. We can see a similar sort of pattern if we look at the Bachelor of Commerce and the Bachelor of Education and so on. And we can extend this out further as we desire. That's also possible. We also have international student intakes. So they're smaller, but they sort of follow the same general guideline. So now we're going to go and we're going to run a scenario live. So let's say I made some changes to my scenario. I did this before the webinar started, and I'm going to click run. And it's going to ask me how many iterations I want. The Coles notes on this is a high number like 1,000 is good for statistical purposes, and a low number like 10 is not so good for statistical purposes. So we run a lot of iterations so that we can have reasonable medians for our scenarios, and we can have confidence bands associated with them. So let's run that and see how it goes. So we can see now that our scenario is queued. And if I go to overview, I will see in the scenario runs in the center here that it's queued. I'm just going to hit refresh on the browser. I can see that it's now running. So it's been about 3 seconds since it started. And I'll hit refresh one more time. It's now been 9 seconds. And I'll hit refresh one more time. And now it's been about 15 seconds total. I can now see that my scenario is completed. So on the right-hand side, we can see the results based on those intakes. So now the Central Plan A is populated. And I'm now going to share this with the Dean of Business. You may recall previously that the Dean cannot see any scenarios yet. So we'll go back to our central view and we'll share this. All right, so I've added the Dean of Business, and it looks like we've got some debugging text appearing. Apologies for that. That's what threw me off too. The default is to give access level read. So what that means is that the Dean could see the results of this scenario, but not really do anything with it. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to change it to write because I want them to be able to make changes to this. So I'll hit save, and momentarily, once this dialog goes away, I'll now go back to my view as the Dean. So remember, now I'm the Dean of Business. And on my scenario screen, I can now see Central Plan A. So this is a good start. So let's say that I like this as a starting point, but I actually want to make my own scenario. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clone this because that analyst in Central made my life a lot easier. And I'll call this Business Plan A for now. And I'm going to do 5 years as well. And I'm going to create a scenario. The advantage to scenario cloning is that it means I don't have to enter those intakes myself. Somebody else already did it, or it was done by the machine. So for example, I work in business, so I'm going to look at the Bachelor of Commerce, and I can see here as I add new terms that my intakes have been set for me. But I know something that Central doesn't here. I know that my intention is actually to increase my intakes. And so for that, I'm going to focus just on the summer terms because they're our biggest ones. So let me just bring in summer. And now I've got 5 years worth of summer for domestic, and I'll add international to that. And what we're going to do is we're going to show a little bit of growth each year. So I'll bump that from 250 up towards 300. And then I'm going to start slowing that growth down as we get into the out years. And for international, we'll grow a tiny bit quicker. And then we're going to put the brakes on that as we get into the out years as well. So I'm going to save my changes to commerce, and we can see how those increases came in. Momentarily, we'll see that they're saved. And just for confirmation, I can click on another faculty or another program, like arts, and I can see that their summer intakes remain the same as they were before. So those are included in my scenario because I want to project the whole institution, not just my own program. Now that I've set those changes for commerce, I can hit run. So let's run the scenario again. We'll give it about 15, 20 seconds, and we should have our results. And once we do, we'll go in and take a look at what this looks like. So we can see now that it's running in about a second. And now closer to 10 seconds. And now we're done. Around 15 seconds again. We can see now that we have results here. Now, this is fairly hard to distinguish from what we saw before, but let's take a closer look. So remember here, I'm the Dean of Business. So let's take a look at commerce first. So I'm going to take a look at the Bachelor of Commerce, and I can see it's growing, well, quite a lot, actually. But I want to see how this compares to that other scenario that Central had. So I'm going to set a comparison here. And I can see now that the Business Plan A is in blue and the Central Plan A is in red, and that there's a difference between them. They're both growing, but the business plan has us growing faster than the Central Plan did. By being able to compare these, we can get a sense of how changes from, say, business in this case, may impact the rest of the institution. A common impact we see for that is business students often have to take a variety of courses during their first year. Examples include calculus typically, and English typically, and several others. But for sake of argument, if business grows, let's look out to 2028, it's about 8,500 versus 6,700. We'll round that off and call it a difference of about 1,700. That's a lot more seats that math and English have to offer that they may not otherwise be expecting. So we could use the same process of sharing to the other deans to alert them that this is our growth plan so they can better plan for what that means for their faculties. In turn, I can choose to share this back with the central analyst. So that's Andrew in this case, and we'll make it so that they can write. And just for demonstration's sake, if I go back to my central plan now, or sorry, my central user now, I can see that business plan A is now showing up for me. So as a central analyst, I can view that as well. I'm going to go back to business for one more thing in terms of our scenario comparison here. I had mentioned that we do 1,000 iterations and that we do this for statistical reasons. So by default, we show average headcounts, but we also can have median. They're sometimes a little different, sometimes very close to the same. The bigger the program, the more identical they are. We can also add confidence intervals, however. And so what we see here is that there are confidence bounds around this. As we get further into the future, those confidence bands get a little bit wider. And this isn't so pronounced for a big program like commerce, but if we look at a smaller program like CAD technician and trades, we can see here that our confidence bands get a fair bit wider. So we'd expect, say, 813 through a high of 847 and a low of about 772. So depending on our capacity, how we choose to plan our offerings could really change depending on this. So in a nutshell, this is how we can create scenarios in Plaid Forecast. We can clone them to give us a quick starting point on what the next scenario will be. We can share them with other users. We can make modifications to them. We can run them again, and then we can share them back to other users as it's appropriate. We can also make changes within scenarios. So let's say I got those intakes wrong in commerce and I wanted to change them. I could do so with the same editor, and what that'll do is it'll create a new version of the same scenario. So call it version 2 of business plan A if I wanted to change these. So that helps us keep track of all the different versions of our scenarios so that we can compare them over time. And that might matter for changing intakes, but where it really matters in terms of versions is as time marches on, the assumptions behind the scenes in the forecast, whether it's retention rates or a number of other variables, those things change because real student behavior changes. And so let's say it's this time next month in April, and our forecast is updated automatically, we'd have a new version in April that even if we left our intakes the same, might have a different set of results because behavior had changed. So we allow for that as well. And you can compare within and across scenarios. Today we looked at across. There's a variety of other features in Plaid Forecast that we won't cover in depth today, but wanted to briefly mention that there are ways to upload your data. It's all aggregates, so you shouldn't have issues with freedom of information, protection of privacy, or FERPA type acts. And this can be done through the interface. We can also talk to you about getting direct integration to your system so that it can update on a pattern like a schedule. So with that, let me move back to the slides. We'll wrap this up and we will take some questions. So in closing, Plaid Forecast is a mobile-friendly enrollment forecasting platform that allows you to save your time, increase your accuracy, and engage your stakeholders in the strategic enrollment management and planning process. Today, we talked about how a central planner and a dean of business could work together and help each other learn about what scenarios might hold for the institution in the future. We could compare those different scenarios to each other, see the different results, and then actually spend our time, rather than reconciling them, figuring out the value add around why does that change matter? What does it mean for our institution? This is where we want analysts to be. And Plaid would argue this is what most analysts want to do with their job, rather than gluing together data or VLOOKUPing and trying to figure out, is there a difference between this spreadsheet and this other spreadsheet? As a reminder, Plaid provides data integration, analytics, forecasting, like today, and governance type services. We'd love to talk to you if your institution is interested in exploring some of these possibilities further. And we would welcome conversation with you. We'd be happy to arrange a demo for your campus and consider a trial around the kind of data that you have. The starting point for this process is what's called a strategic enrollment needs and readiness assessment. And this focuses on how forecasting is done at your institution currently, who's involved, who should be involved, where the gaps are, how they can be improved, and how a tool like Plaid Forecast could help you do faster, better, and more accurate planning as you move forward. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today.